ಬಂದಿದೆ ಬಂದಿದೆ ಹಿರಿಯರ ವಾಣಿ, ಹಿರಿಯರೇ ಇತರ ರಾಜ ರಾಣಿ, ಹತ್ತೋಣ ನಾವು ಅವರ ನೆನಪಿನ ದೋಣಿ, ಕೇಳುತ್ತಾ ಖುಷಿ ಪಡೋಣ ಹಿರಿಯರ ವಾಣಿ, ಕೇಳ್ತಾನೆ ಖುಷಿ ಪಡೋಣ ಹಿರಿಯರ ವಾಣಿ, ಕೇಳ್ತಾನೆ ಖುಷಿ ಪಡೋಣ ಹಿರಿಯರ ವಾಣಿ. ಇದು ಹಿರಿಯರ ಕತೆ ಹಿರಿಯರ ಜೊತೆ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಹಿರಿಯರ ವಾಣಿಯಲ್ಲಿ. ಕೇಳ್ತಾನೆ ಇರಿ, ಖುಷಿಯಾಗಿರಿ.
Hello listeners, this is your RJ Satyachari and I welcome you all to Anubhav, a joint project of National Institute of Social Defence, Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, Government of India and Media for Community Foundation, implemented by Nightingale's Medical Trust. Project conceived by Dr. R. Sridhar, project investigators Alok Verma, coordinators Pooja Murada, Sai Sudha, Kausalya. Government of India has initiated Elder Line toll-free number 14567. Elders or anyone on behalf of elders can call between morning 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. for any questions, queries and support to elderly.
Today we have with us Radha Prati. She is a storehouse of talents. But she's a very familiar figure to most of us. A professor of English and Sanskrit literature by profession, she's into traditions, scriptures, culture, arts and crafts, painting and philosophy. Now, all of us are very familiar with a lot of our Indian traditions and culture, but in a very superfluous manner. We are not aware of so many inner stories and its background usages in our present lives. Radha has done a lot of research into all these aspects as she conducts workshops for children to respect the same. We'll be greatly benefited by her expert insight and analysis. Our hobbies are reading, knitting, gardening, and reflecting on the philosophy of everyday life. Her articles have been published in the Deccan Herald and the Hindu. She covers most issues with the exception of politics and sports. Now it's over to you, Radha. The field is all yours. Thank you.
Good morning, all of you. Namaste. Thank you, Usha, for that introduction. I hope I live up to this expectation of my familiar audience and also my unfamiliar audience. As the topic says, I can only scratch the surface because, the deeper you go, the deeper it gets. And what I'm going to do is, I will not look at it from a superficial point of view, but I will probably look at how we can look at there is philosophy in everyday life of an Indian with or without the knowledge of it. Most of us do many things without really, knowing the deep significance of what we do. For that matter, everything that we do can be interpreted at three levels. One, at the physical level, that is, at the literal level. Why we do what we do, for what and what purpose it serves. But then you find that at the mental level, there is a certain amount of intelligence, purpose, and a kind of, what shall we say, a method in which we do whatever we do can be understood. But everything can be taken to a spiritual level. Okay, so we are going to look at some basic aspects of life. What are the basic aspects of life? As all of us look at it, roti, kapda or makan, right? All of us need to eat. All of us need to wear clothes to protect ourselves from the elements of the weather. And we need a shelter. Okay, and this is a universal thing. It is there across the world. Everybody does that. Okay, and everybody does it for basically the same purpose. But then what can be so esoteric about the food we eat? Okay, I think when you actually read, when we look at our way of understanding food, we call it as not just Annam, but Anna Brahma. Okay, what is Anna Brahma? This Brahma is not this creator Brahma, but it is Brahman, which helps us to maintain the equation between the Sthula and the Sukshma, that is the Sharira and the Atma. It keeps us together. The food is what which helps us to sustain. And you find that food, when you come to the topic of food in India, you will find that there are 100,000 varieties to the power of I don't know how much. And each house will have its own special variation of cooking the very same dish, which is probably, predominantly cooked in the same community. So you can say it is like each for one and one for each kind of food. So I'm not talking about the varieties of food, but the concept of this food. You must have all noticed that, see, in a traditional setup or in a household, how do we have our food? We offer the Chitravati. We pour the water around the thing and offer it, and then to the Brahman and then consume it, which shows that it doesn't mean that we worship the food that we eat. It means that we respect. There is a difference between worshipping and respecting. Worshipping can also be, a token value, but when you respect it, it takes a different dimension. And then we also find, food is offered by way of prasadam. And it is who offers the prasadam? It is the gods. But who is it who makes it into the prasadam? It is we. You make something, offer it to God as a nivedanam, as a naivedya. And then when you take it back, it gains some kind of a elevation, and it becomes, blessed by the superior power, which comes back to us as a blessing, which we consume, probably gives us a little more pep, a little more energy than if we just took it. If you just buy half a kg of laddu from Asha Sweets, it will taste good. Why not? It is worth all the money that you pay it. But then why does a few bundis from the Tirupati laddus, become so very special? Basically because, it is offered to us as prasad. Now talking of the laddu, we keep offering the laddu as a prasadam, or, as a token of our happiness during childbirths, marriages, functions, festivals, and all of it. But what does the laddu indicate? I'm just going to look at, as I told you, just scratch the surface, so maybe one item. So all of us know that a laddu is made of bundis. And all the bundis are made of the same material, ingredients. And they are all shaped almost similarly. Together, they become the laddu. They are fastened together as the laddu. So each bundi itself is like a microcosm constituting to the macrocosm. This is the concept of the laddu. Why do we give the laddu? Because we want to say that, like I told you, to each in one and one in each. One in all. So you find that each bundi is a representative of the whole, and together they represent the whole. And that is why the laddu is given so much of predominance as a sweet during these functions. The other common word that we use is modakam. See, in the next 2 weeks, we are going to have the Ganesh Chaturthi, next Friday. And all of us are going to come up with, whip up a whole lot of recipes regarding this modakam. Each region will come up with something saying that, hey, this is our speciality. But what is modakam at the end of the day? It is mudati, means that which gives you mudam. Mudam is happiness in Sanskrit, is modakam. That's all. So when you actually look at the etymology of the word, it could mean anything, like every kind of modakam, every creativity added to the dish. If it gives you the happiness of having offered it to the Lord and taking it back, it can become modakam. So like this is just, as I told you, I'm just scratching the surface. We just looked at roti. And what about kapada? The clothes we wear. There is a specific reason why we wear the clothes we wear. When we look at the ethnic traditional clothes, there are two categories that are prescribed by the Shastras for a very specific reason. One is the ahatas and the anahata, that is bleached clothes and unbleached clothes. I mean, in other words, it's like washed and unwashed. And we all know this concept of muddy. When you don't wash a cloth, it can be reused again, something like that. But then you also notice that they have a single piece of unstitched cloth. Okay, and usually you wear it as only twin cloth. Okay, even today when you offer clothes to people on a traditional occasion, you don't offer them a single cloth. You give a sari with a blouse piece or a dhoti with a shirt piece or something like that. So you find that it is symbolic. When a person wears two pieces of unstitched cloth, that means the occasion is Mangalakara. It is auspicious. Okay, and when it is not Mangalakara, you wear a single cloth. See, for instance, during instances of funerals or Shraddhanjalis, you just wear a single piece of cloth, or in singular. Okay. Whereas if it's a happy occasion, it's always two pieces of cloth. And so also with the abhushana that we wear. It's not just vastram, it is also abhushana. So all the abhushanams that we wear not only speak about our aesthetic values, our economic status, and probably our taste for good dressing and the rest of it. But if you actually look at it, all the piercings that we do around the ears and the nose, which is called as a punk tradition in some countries, but it is an accepted tradition as far as India is concerned. You find that it is done for a certain reason. See, when you pierce, what happens is, we all know that the blood flow is always going on in its natural course. Okay, and if you want to elevate or probably what shall we say, accelerate or change, then what happens is you have to change the direction. It's like a traffic jam situation. See, let us say there is a traffic jam at the Corporation Circle in Bangalore. So what will the police do if, in the worst come case, they will divert traffic through Vittal Malya Road and other roads so that it can be contained, and then it can ease out. And that's exactly what our piercings do. And you find that this constant this piercing actually keeps our systems in a very what shall we say, good and apt condition. And also when we wear our jewelry, it is usually recommended that it should be one of the what shall we say, the yellow metal or silver, and or the panchalohas, one of the panchalohas, iron, copper, or gold, silver. So you find that these are the metals, when they embrace our body or when they graze through our body, GRAZD, you will find that they activate certain nerves, which is good for us. The reason why we wear an anklet or the toe ring or the nose ring or a chain or a set of bangles is not only for the aesthetic value, but it is also for the well-being of our nervous system. See, for instance, a pregnant lady is asked to wear a number of glass bangles during her pregnancy, especially after the 6th or 7th month after the Srimanta. Okay, and this has got a very practical purpose. The purpose is, see, when she is wearing so many bangles, and she is also told additionally, make sure that none of these break till the day of your delivery. So it is an automatic, what we call as some kind of a hump on the road. It slows down the driving. Similarly, it slows down the pregnant woman because she will be cautious and careful while treating, 1. 2, and all her bangles will make this little tinkling noise, which will, ensure that there are no obstacles in her way. Even if somebody is, on her way, inadvertently, what will happen is they will hear her bangle or her anklet, and then bangles or her anklet, and then clear and make way for her. So you find that these have both, as I told you, everything has a practical purpose. There is a mental, chime there, and then there is also a connect out there at another level. And now you find that it is not just the abhushanam. Okay, it is also the alankarams that we have. Like, for instance, all of us whether no matter to which gender you belong to, we wear something on the forehead, the bindi, the tilaka, whatever you call it. Okay, and this. Of course, you can give it a lot of religious significance, which it has. Okay, I'm not going to venture into that. Or it has a lot of aesthetic significance and it adds to your personality. I am not going to dwell on that also. But what is the original purpose of wearing a bindi or a tilaka? Not just on the forehead, but in ashtangams. The men usually put it in the ashtangam, whether it is the vibhuti or the tiruman or the tilak or whatever. The reason is you are activating the Agna chakra, which is there between the brows. So you find that, this activation of the Agna chakra has to happen continuously for us to be alert and to have a mentally hygienic life. That is also very important. It's not just important if we are physically well off or physically good. We should also be in a state of mental clarity at all points of time. And then what about our hair? This Kesha Alankaram is something which is a subject by itself on which we can actually write a thesis. Okay, so you find that when the moment you look at a person's hair, you can make out what is happening in their lives. Like for instance, you find that a haircut or probably a tonsure happens usually only on a couple of occasions. One, as an offering to the Lord as your prayer. One. The second time that it happens, or the next 2 times it happens, is when you lose your parents, and the men usually tonsure their head, and this is what it is symbolic of. And when women are told not to, cut their hair or probably make sure that it is plaited till the end, there is a certain reason. Because the hair, as you know, is supposed to be a symbol of our energy. I can just give you a small example. See, all of us have seen these pictures of gods and goddesses. They are not photographs of the gods, but we have representations of paintings done on the basis of what the artist has interpreted from the texts. Okay. And you will find that all of them have let their hair down. Okay. And yet, the common man is told, tie up your hair. Why? Because the hair is a symbol of energy. Okay. And when you let down, you must have plenty of hair to let down. Plenty of energy to let down your hair. Because, see, the first thing when we are asked to do a task, what do? We tie up our hair, right? The women tie up the hair. Even otherwise, you just do this and it gives you a lot of energy because, when you harness the hair together in a tight bun or into a tight plait, or at least pass your hand heavily through your hair, what happens is you will be in a position to harness energy. And this is why, you inadvertently take your hands to your hair or your head when you have to think heavily. Okay. And you find that letting go of the hair, now I've told you why it has been done this way. But when we look at our Mahabharatam, you will find Draupadi says, I'm not going to tie the hair. It is precisely for this reason. Because as a Grihini, as the Griha Lakshmi of her home, she is supposed to keep her hair tied, which means she has to keep her energies harnessed. She doesn't see any point in doing that after the kind of insult that she has been through. So she lets it down. Okay. You will find that, in the same Mahabharata, when Drona is sitting in a state of samadhi, when after Yudhishthira tells him that Ashwatthama is dead, you find that Drishtadyumna, the son of Drupada, he has taken a oath that he will kill Drona. So he comes and holds his hair. A fight in Sanskrit or fight in Indian languages, what do you call it? Shikashiki. Hold the hair and fight, because that is this point of energy. And look at Chanakya. See, recently when I say or talk about Mahabharata, it might sound very far away, but closer home. I mean, closer to the date, which is again a few, easily more than 1,000 years ago, when Chanakya had to establish the Mauryan kingdom, and when he had to overthrow the Mahapadmananda, okay, the Nanda dynasty, and that is because he was insulted. And what does he do? He lets his shikha down. See, the Brahmanas wear a shikhe, a bun, a man bun. And he lets it down and he says, I'm not going to tie this up till I teach this Mahapadmananda a lesson. And he ties his hair up on the day Chandragupta Maurya is crowned as the king of India. So you find that the alankaram, the kapada, the clothes that we wear have a lot of meaning. The colors that we wear. One listening of Meera Bhajans will talk about, uske rang mein rangna. To become one with the color, getting dyed into the color of the, the Kesariya Balama is both not only a sign of love, but it is also a sign of bhakti. And each color has its own representation. And if you go deeply into the study of colors, you will find that each of them have a lot of esoteric values. And then I will get on to the next thing, that is the makan, roti kapda or makan. Makan mein kya cheez hai? So you find that makan can be broadly interpreted as what? As architecture. Okay, all of us live in a house, and I think now the architects and the Vastu Purohits or Pandits are making sure that every one of us know a little about Vastu. But then there was a lot of practical good sense when there was a lot of Vastu happening once. Architecture happening once upon a time. Look at all our temples. It doesn't matter whether it's a North Indian temple or a South Indian temple. You will find that all of them taper to the top. They are broad at the bottom and they taper to the top. It makes engineering good sense because it gives good balance. Okay, but on top we also see the kumbhas, means little vessels, metallic vessels. And what are these vessels? And you know that once in every 12 years you have to perform the Kumbhabhishek. So what does this serve? Is it just marking? Is it just a hallmark year in which a lot of celebration happens? No. It is actually a year where you are going to refill the kumbha with more of unhusked grains, which are actually non-conductors of electricity. See, in a typical, village or a city, today we have skyscrapers. You will find that, no building has to become taller than the Gopuram of the temple. This is an unwritten rule, including the palaces. The reason is this. One, of course, just to explain it in a literal way, God is superior to everybody. But what is the practical good sense there? So you have a non-conductor there, and so if at all there is going to be a heavy thunder and lightning which is going to strike the place, it will be borne by the god, the Gopuram on the temple. So you find that it has its practical purpose. Nothing is done without a purpose, except that it is not handed down. See, when many things are explained, see, if there are children at home, all of us know, we go on explaining to the child. And after a certain point of time, we get a little tired. So you just make up something. And then you say, hey, accept it as it is. Or, I don't know. And maybe you should grow up to learn whatever I have to share. So you find all of this is actually a component of the Makan. And then you also find that, the building temples, in the Agama Vidhi. The Agama Vidhi has a certain way in which a temple should be built. I'm not talking about these street corner temples. I'm talking about a typical Agama Vidhi temple, whether it is the Nanjandeshwara temple or whether it is the Brihadishwara Koil or whether it is Sri Shailam or Tirupati or anywhere that you go. See, it will have certain features. When you go to the temple, there will be a Kalyani there. That means there is enough water. It is either a natural pond which has been prepared for domestic purposes, or it could be a artificial pond prepared once again for the domestic purposes. And then as you enter the temple, you will see the Dvajastambham. This Dvajastambham is not only to talk about the greatness of God or to show that He is ruling over the place, it is also used during times of war, floods, fires, to caution the village around. Then the temple bells that are, used to make announcements. And a typical temple will have a Goshala, a Gajashala, a Nartanashala. Then there will be a hall to conduct weddings. In the Praharam, you will find that there are, it's not really a hall, it's not like a chowdhury, but a space to conduct these functions. So these were something like if I have to put it very bluntly, it's like a mall in which our youngsters hang out today. That's what the youngsters of those olden days did. They would go to the temple, pray to the Lord or the goddess, and then hang around the temple, and then they would have plenty to do. And if you're talented, you can, exhibit your talents there. And if you want to sell something there, you can do it. Okay, there would be a small market improvised immediately outside the temple, which means it's also going to boost up the economy of the temple. So you find that all of this, the roti, kapda or makan, speaks about the basics, and how these little basics can actually contribute to the big picture. And when we do everything thoughtfully or mindfully, as we call it these days, you will find that you can actually add meaning to an everyday activity. Okay, so apart from this basic thing, Indians are so stuck up with these riti rivas. We are always talking about nam paddhati hige or hamara riti rivas ye hai, whatever. So what are all these ritis and rivas about? What are all these traditions and cultures that we talk about? Once again, they have been formed with the same principle. They have been done for a literal practical principle with a lot of mental thought, and it is definitely aiming at a spiritual exercise. Okay, we are giving us a deco or giving us a glimpse of what is in store for us or what we can possibly achieve. So what are all of this? So for instance, all of us know a few things about, let us say, we know that the Vedas have a lot of information. Okay, and there are people who say we must worship Shani on Saturday and the Surya on Sunday. Okay, we all go to the Navagraha temples and talk about it. And it is fascinating to note that all those years ago, we identified the planets, their characteristics, and all of this, and they were put down as shlokas. See, for instance, look at the Mangala shloka. All of us know how the NASA sent the Pathfinder to Mars. Okay, and what did the Pathfinder find out? That Mars is made of silicon material, it has water, and it is livable. That is, after you domesticate it to some extent. And look at the shloka of Mangala. It talks of Bhumi Putro Mahatejo Jata Mabbaya Kritsada. That's how it goes. Bhumi Putro. What is Bhumi made of? Silicon. Okay. And you find that the Putra will also be made of the same silicon, right? And he talks about Vrishtikrit Trishtikartaj. And it talks about the red planet also. It is red in color. It has water in it. So all of these factors are captured in that little shloka. We have great glimpses of science in all our stories. And one of the famous Navagraha stories, which I'm very fond of narrating, I'll probably take 2 minutes to do that, will be the story of Surya, the sun god. Surya was married to Sandhya. And Sandhya found it very, very difficult to live with Surya. So what she did was, she cloned herself. Okay, she made a chaya of herself. She made a shadow of herself and requested this chaya to go and live with Surya because she could not live with such a resplendent man who was extremely bright and extremely hot. Okay, but Chaya manages to live because she is there. And Surya and Chaya have 3 children among them, 2 boys and a girl. Okay, and it's Dharma, Yama, and Yami. Okay, and as the children grow up, they are just playing in the Devalokam. And when children play, or when all of us look at children, especially in our known circles, the first thing we do is we try to figure out who they look like, right? So that's exactly what even the Devas did. They looked at these 3 children and said, hey, look at Surya and look at Sandhya. They're all like extremely fair and very good looking people. These children have looks all right, but why are they so dark in complexion? And this one question is enough for Surya to, finally understand that he is not living with his wife, but with her clone. So he kicks up a big ruckus, and then what happens is he takes it up with Chaya, and she has to confess the truth. That's another part of the story. But the part that I am coming to is he is very upset, and for some reason, Manda or Shani is also upset with his father. He said, how can we be responsible for all the problems between the 2 of you? And so you find that Surya is so angry that he takes off one spoke from the wheel of his chariot and he hits Shani. This is the story. And see, and in this story you have 3 things. We have already come across one scientific factor, that is cloning was done. 1. The second thing is, it explains, that the spokes of the wheel of Surya also talk about the Dinacharya. That is our calendar. 7 days a week, and 1 solar month having 30 days and so on and so forth, a year and all that. So, one spoke is taken off once in a while, which means it also explains the leap year, which kind of makes it. And then it also says why Shani became Manda, because his leg was hurt in an irreparable way and he could not walk properly anymore. Okay, so this is one aspect of the story. And then as the children grow up, nobody is willing to marry Yami because they feel she is the illegitimate child of Surya. So Yami becomes extremely upset with this. So there is a beautiful Yama-Yami Samvada in the Samavedam, where Yami goes and tells Yama, can we please marry each other? Since no one is willing to marry me. And so, though this sounds like apacharam, the moment I say this, somebody would have thought, what kind of a crazy thing it is. But then this little dialogue is also the predecessor of why people of the same blood, especially born of the same womb, should not marry each other. So there is a long, dialogue explaining genetics. And genetics has also been understood, talking about the DNAs and all of that. But, and the other Veda, that is in the Atharvana Veda, there is also a thing about the Naga, worship of Nagas there. All of us, I think, must have seen Nagas under these Ashwatha trees, right? Under people trees. You will find 3 Naga stones. There will be one Rajanagam in between. Then there will be another Nagam which will be shaped like a DNA. It's like this. It goes like this. This is how a DNA looks. And what are people expected to do? The people who want to have children, they are supposed to hold one chrysanthemum flower in the palms of their hands, and then they are asked to go round and round this tree. What does it actually do? The chrysanthemum flower has a certain, a pressure which kind of activates the palms of the hand, and then the people leave, which all face downwards past the energy, which means it is kind of preparing the human body to become a little more fertile. And what is it? What are they going around? The Naga stones, which means that, if there are any genetic cures, I mean, of course, it goes into as a huge, deep science, but then the idea is that is how the belief has begun. But if you're just going to do things without really understanding, some of them are not even prayers, they are just talking about the qualities of certain aspects of life. So you find that if we consider them to be prayers, then it doesn't make sense at all. Because a prayer is an act of submission. Whereas when you read out all the properties of a planet, it is for you to understand that it is like this. The idea of worshipping the planets is to say that, no matter what your alignment is, if we are able to look and understand that, not everybody can be in the same alignment, life becomes easy. That is the principle of the Navagraha worship. It's true, isn't it? Our own 5 fingers are not alike. So how can you expect so many other people to be alike? So how will going around the temple, and saying let my husband give up his drinking, or let my mother-in-law see some good sense. More than that, if you are able to look at them as people and understand why they are doing what they are doing and trying to find an answer to it, then you'll find the alignment will happen. And that's exactly what all the Navagraha worships are all about. And usually a ritual is added in order to channelize our mind. It is only to discipline us. See, today, let us say today is a Friday. Though it can be done every day, but you will find that in most houses, a lot of things are energized on Friday. There are some special pujas that happen. So, because a special puja is happening, so you clean up the place. You draw a rangoli, you light a lamp. So, it's not that, the act itself may not be important. But when you're doing the act, what happens is you're concentrating on something, which means your mind is free. And you're not thinking of unnecessary things, which means you can do something purposefully. And then when you complete that, naturally, you are a little stress-free, which means you have enough energy to tackle whatever the day has to offer to you. That's all. Okay. So it is about discipline our mind that all our rituals are all about. So, and then we were talking of also other things like the rivas. Now you have these rivas of sending pregnant wives to their mothers' homes for delivery. Why do we do that? See, it has got no great philosophical meaning. It is practical good sense. See, in any kind of a family, we know that we all belong to the Sanatana Dharma. And the moment a son is born, what happens is the child becomes a bhagedar of the family's property. And usually it can be a little unsafe for the lady to stay in her husband's home during pregnancy, for the simple reason that something or somebody could harm her or her child. But when she goes to her mother's home, she has no, what shall we say, she has no claims over the property out there. So it's okay for them to take care of her and do it. This might sound a little brutish in today's society, but it is the sad truth. Even great queens used to go to their mothers' homes for this very, very simple reason. Because, being a queen of a country and being the potential mother of the crown prince can be dangerous both to the mother and the child. We all know the story of Pannadai. How she had to, replace the prince with Uday Singh with her own baby to save the crown prince for the throne of Mewar. And we have 100,000 stories like this in India, which are happening to date. And you find that this rivas makes a lot of sense. And for the girl also, the mother to be also, it makes a lot of good sense because it gives her emotional stability and probably a little rest, much needed rest before her delivery. So you find that many of these ribazes are also like this. And as I told you right in the beginning, when I talk of one, I'm missing out on 100 others or 1,000 others. But as I told you, the topic is one of, what do you call? It is like scratching the surface, so we can't really go deeper. We can't do too many things. And then when we talk, you must have noticed one thing in my talk. Am I talking only about ancient things? Yes. But then you will find that the Indian tradition, it is not like a salad bowl. It is like a pot of melting cultures. See, whatever comes to India becomes Indian. Okay, this is the point that I'm trying to make. See, for instance, I don't know, lovers of South Indian music must have heard this Arabi Ragam. Okay, Arabi Ragam is nothing but, it was taken from the Arabs who came to sell their horses to the Chola kingdom. So you can, perhaps after the talk, just go and listen to Arabi Ragam and play some Arabian music, and you will see that the swarams are the same. And today it has become a part of the Indian, South Indian Carnatic classical music, that even on Tyagaraja Aradhana Day, we all sit and sing Sadinchene in Arabi Ragam. See, what has been taken from outside has become a part of India. It is said that India did not have potatoes till, it came from England, and it was presented first in the court of Jahangir. And he didn't know what to do. It was given to him on a tray. So he said, this can be cooked. Can you please go and do something with it? And so the Mughal cook actually, worked on the potatoes, and he came up with some paratas and some other dum alus and things like that. And then potato has become a part of our cuisine. Can you ever think of an Indian cuisine without, a nice potato roast? Is something that all of us enjoy, cholesterol or not, carbohydrates or not. We all enjoy it. And it has come from outside. We have gathered it in our arms. We have domesticated it and made it our own Indian aspect. Like this, we have 100 other things. See, our mornings are never complete without that cup of coffee. But did we have coffee before Baba Budangiri went from Chikmagalur on a Hajj Yatra, and he comes back with a few coffee beans, and he plants it in Chikballapur, and then it all grew, and it has become a part of our lives now. We can't think of a day which can go through without the coffee. And look at the other thing. We have other things like, for instance, the Parda system, the Sati system, or for instance, child marriages happening in the borders of India, the eastern borders of India, Gujarat and Rajasthan. And all these are nothing but the direct results of the various invasions that took place from that area. So when the Khiljis came, when the Mughals came, so the women there were the first, the casualties of all the wars. And they had to introduce these things. And today it has become a part of our dress culture. Okay, so I'm also going to talk about the fusion of cultures very quickly. Okay, I'm just going to put down 10 points where, just like I told you about the potato or the, wearing an odni and things like that, you'll find that so many things. The use of violin in Carnatic classical music. Violin is a very, very Western instrument. But today, we have great violinists in India. Lalgudi Jayaraman. More recently, Dr. Subramaniam, L. Subramaniam. And we have a lot of budding violinists in India. And then, what about using candles as diyas? Candle is a very, Western thing. But today, when we have our Diwalis, we all prefer to use a diya with a wax candle because it's a little messy to use oil. It has become a part of our thing. See, we have Indianized a alien culture. That's the point that I'm trying to make. We have seen dosa camps where they put Szechuan noodles into masala dosas and give you. Why not? Okay. Or when you do pujas to electric and electronic appliances. Say, for instance, when I started off, looked at my laptop today, I said, hey, God, make this talk come true. And what was I praying to? My laptop. Because, and it doesn't matter, it's the bhavam which is more important. It doesn't matter whether you put kumkum and chandam to your mixie or whether to your, I will do that to my oven if I have to bake. Because I want it to turn out right. That's exactly what our grandmothers did when they drew a rangoli and put haldi kumkum on their stoves, right? And what about the remake of mythologies? See, look at Oliver. What was our first movie after Alam Mara? The speaking movie was Harishchandra. Then you have Mirabai. Look at the movies. You make those stories again and again and again. You rewrite those stories again and again and again. It's not enough if it is written in one language by one person. Or our Amish Patels and Devdutt Patnayaks reach their top only because they're going back to the mythology. Okay, and even like when ma'am mentioned that when I write, I go back to mythology again. You know, I try to draw a new inference. My inference may be new, but the story is the same. So we do and redo the same things. It is there. And see, we had the HMV records, and then we had the cassettes, and then we had, you know, the CDs, and now you have Spotify and you have cloud music. And if you want, you can still listen to your Vishnu Sahasranamam on that. That will not change. The device can change, but the Indianness, or what do you call, the tradition, has not changed. And then you look at the fusion of music, art, architecture. We have everything everywhere. You can still play a nice Hindi film song on a keyboard. Who's going to stop you? You can pair your jeans with a nice, Kashmiri embroidered top. Why not? Or you can have a nice, candle stand with a Hyderabadi lotus there. You can have this kind of a thing. The fusions are there, and we have made it all ours, to the point that people don't even know that this has come from outside. Okay. And what about using English words in everyday life? Can all of us think of a word for tomato? In our languages, it's not there. We happily use the English word. And what about the word like bus or car? Of course, we have something like Perundu in Tamil or something like that. But how many of us do it? We don't say Tri Chakra Yanam to the auto. We call him auto. Okay. And it has become a part of our language. And we use it. Like I was telling the other day, if you have to tell directions in the auto, you cannot use proper English. You can't use received pronunciation. Okay, left to, right to, if you use it like that, he will understand. If you are going to say left, right, he is going to turn back and ask you for directions again. Okay, so you have to, we have this way of embracing cultures and making it ours. And that is what makes India so special. And what about this very recent thing? I have noticed, I don't have WhatsApp though, but I can see it on my mails. I get a mail and say, within 10 seconds, share this in 30 thing if you want immediate blessings. Then I tell them, no, I can do without these blessings. Sorry, I don't do it. That's a different thing. But do you remember? I remember when we were kids, we were, we used to get postcards like this saying, do this. Or you go to a temple and then the pujari will say, so give 1,000 copies of this Lalita Sahasranamam to 1,000 ladies who come here and make sure your daughter will get married in the next 20 days. How will a sheet of paper get your daughter married? The idea is you want 1,000 ladies to recite that. Okay, so you find that some funny things also become a part of the culture which we take even in the electronic era. Tomorrow, even if we have a cloud to ourselves, we will keep sending messages which have to be circulated. Okay, and if Usha can give me another few minutes, is it okay, Usha? Yeah. So you find that I'm going to talk about how India is postmodern. Okay, postmodern and in what sense? very quickly. We'll just go through it as points. Okay. When people come and tell me we are losing the tradition and culture, I always say no, we are having it in another form. That's all. Okay. And some of our traditions are so postmodern that people have been able to understand it only today. That is not in any specific order, but I'll just go through this. Okay. What about the concept of the other gender? We are all familiar with the male and the female. Okay. What about all the other genders who are biologically neither male nor female? Today, Europe has come up with rights for them. But look at our stories. Look at Shikandi. We have had, and he was there as one of the warriors in one of the biggest wars that was ever fought. Okay, and when you look at the Mughal courts, they made sure that the eunuchs were the ones who were in charge of the harems, because the Mughals felt that their women would be safe with these eunuchs. Even today, you find that up there in the north, you'll find that when a child is born, these people are asked to bless the child. Okay, so we have already integrated them into the thing. We don't need lessons. We don't need Biden and Trump and, X and Y and Z to tell us, hey, they are a part of your thing. They are a part of us. And it's only off late that, because they are telling, we think that we have alienated them. No. They have been an integral part of our lives from day one. Okay. And then the Panchangam. All of us are aware of it, right? Today, what day is today? We know it is this Tithi, this Nakshatram. This is nothing but a sense of calculation. You can get Panchangam for any year of the world. And no scientist has disputed the Panchangam till date. If you actually look at it very carefully, they even say that today there is going to be rain, today is a good day to sow seeds, today is a good day to start education. And the Panchangams, and especially when it comes to the eclipses, the leap years, we make through with the use of the Adhika Masam. And we are able to balance. And what is Panchangam? It's nothing but computation of numbers and time. And isn't that postmodern? If you have not, because the moment we say in Tamil, usually they say Pazhaya Panchangam. I always say no, it's postmodern Panchangam. It is not old at all. It is, Navanavinam. It is absolutely new, absolutely fascinating. Something that fascinates me when I look at the calendar every day in the morning, when I look at the Nakshatram and the Tithi, I say, how did they manage to make it all so accurate? And then look at the economy. Look at our economic sense. What will a typical Indian do? He will not go and buy shares in a market. Because shares are, all of us know about the recession where we all lost all our money, right? I mean, most people in the West lost their money, whereas most people in the East did not lose their money because we had the practical good sense to invest in land and gold, which at best can be stolen, which means another man can use it, but not us. Okay. And then, and in education, see, even the maids who come to our house know the value of the education. In fact, they spend all their energy in cleaning our homes so that their children can have a better future. And what is their definition of better future? Give them a good education. Do you need a more postmodern thought than this? And then what about improvising? Like, see, we all know that the chutney tastes absolutely good when it's done in a grinding stone. Or where the lassi tastes absolutely good when it is churned best. And what did we do? We came up with electronic grinders. We have washing machines that have been improvised as lassi makers. We have not changed the taste. We have used the same stone, used some mortar, and we are retaining tradition in a modern way. What about all the charcoal soaps and pastes and oil baths that we are having? Today, there's as recently as last week, I read this huge article on chemical-free cosmetics written by some French, beautician. But that's exactly what we were doing. And I think we all belong, all of us in this audience must have seen these Colgate advertisements some 30 years ago, which would say, please use the toothpaste, and somebody will be using a piece of charcoal, and that person will be told, throw the charcoal away and use this Colgate toothpaste. In fact, I was looking for it in the internet to show it to you, just for nostalgia, but there's no time, so I won't do that. But then, but today the same Colgate is selling charcoal toothpastes. Okay, and we have chemical-free cosmetics, and we were using turmeric and all of it. And what about the nail art and other things? Many of the things, I always tell the boys in our class, when somebody oils their hair, there was a time when they would be called as a haldi burka. But today you apply gel on your hair and you look exactly that. Might as well apply oil, which is cheaper and more nourishing to your hair. And what about all our Puranas and Itihasas? What about our Itihasas and Kavyas? When Hiranyakashipu comes and says, I won't die in the morning, I won't die in the evening, I won't die outside the house, I won't die inside the house. Or when Bhasmasura says, I will die only if, if I put my hand on my own head. What are they doing? They are experimenting with the questions of life. They are trying to become immortal. They are trying to find out what can happen to life after death, which is exactly the question that science is asking today. That's exactly what the pharaohs of Egypt did when they built their pyramids. So you find that, it is a thought. That is what, we have answered many questions in Indian. Through science. But till today, we do not know what happens to life after death. And that's exactly what the Puranas were trying to explore. What about our ghee? We know that milk can be stored in many forms, but ghee is the only form where it can be kept for years. Of course, the Europeans will say, what about our cheese? But I would tell them personally that your cheese stinks. I don't like the smell of many of their cheese. But ghee is something that you will never turn away. Or what about our self-help books? Dale Carnegie used to go running to the bank, or our Paul Ciro is going because they've written a whole lot of self-help books. But what is the Bhagavad Gita? It is talking about managing yourself. And it was written all those years ago. And ultimately, what are Indian traditions all about? It is about, finding out the answers to the questions of life. And how can this be done? By understanding our trigunas. We should first find out which category we belong to, whether we are Satvika, Rajasa or Tamasa. Okay. And then we should find out who our enemy is. Arishad Vargam. Kamam, Krodham, Lobham, Moham, Madam, Matsaryam. Which quality do we have and which should we get rid of? Okay, first find out which group you belong to, which should be gotten rid of, and then understand that these can be controlled because of these can be experienced because of our senses, the Panchendriya. And once the Panchendriya once you are able to discipline yourself, you will be able to attain the Purushartha. And what is the Purushartha? This Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Okay. So we are not against materialism, but we are more towards spirituality. I hope I've scratched enough. Thank you for the time. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. We loved the stories with great meaning. Hope to look for more stories like this. Thank you once again. Listeners, I hope you too enjoyed the program. Stay tuned to Hiriyaravani for more such interesting programs. Government of India has initiated a line toll-free number 14567. Elders or anyone on behalf of elders can call between morning 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. for any questions and queries and support to elderly.